you recently had a summit or a meeting where you convened some high-level officials to talk about the issues. Could you talk about what was the aim of that conference? What problem do you want them to focus on? And what are some of the things that happened during your conference? What are the key takeaways?
Yes. So, I mean, allow me to talk about the preparations towards that forum. So when we were conceptualizing this forum, the goal was really very basic, to increase the awareness, but at the same time, increase the appreciation of the issue. The forum was meant to convene the various players in the water and sanitation ecosystem, not to showcase their wisdom or intelligence, but it's more to be in dialogue, to connect and collaborate. So the forum brought in, and surprisingly, 300 people. But that being said, it was an effort, because to your point, it's easily taken for granted.
Right. So was that the central issue? Just to make people aware, hey, wake up, there's a problem brewing that we're not aware of, or we should be more aware of.
It's bigger than that, because that's the means to an end. The bigger issue is, water is already a crisis. We don't have the resources.
It's already a crisis.
It's already a crisis. We don't have the resources. The government, any government now is still suffering from the impact of the pandemic.
Right.
And as you know, government alone cannot do it with its competing priorities. We have to really join together. So this forum was meant to really convene everyone, to talk and really come out with specific cooperation and collaboration to address the issue. Very grateful with the effort and partnership, of course, with you, Klink. Thank you. Grateful for that.
Manila Times, yeah.
Yes, Manila Times. We brought, like what I said, we brought together more than 300 people, over 100 online, and the rest, more than 100 on site, the rest online. Participation, as you know, Governor Jokno joined the group with President
Secretary
Marcos.
Of Finance.
Yes. Now Secretary of Finance joined President Marcos in UNGA that same week. But then he sent his pre-recorded video highlighting the commitment of Department of Finance as chair of the economic advisors to the president, its commitment towards supporting the issue on water, the solutions and to address the issue on water and even climate change. So it was also attended by Deputy Governor Puyat on behalf of the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, because as you know, Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas heads the national strategy for financial inclusion. And as in our conversation earlier, this is about financial inclusion.
Right.
So, what was key takeaways in the forum? Again, there's strength in partnership. Hoping that it's beyond the forum. I'm happy to share that immediately after the forum, Water.org was in meetings to identify a specific course of actions with the big players, Manila Water, Maynilad, and even the financial institutions. So it looks very promising. Again, it's a challenge to sustain effort, but I'm optimistic we'll get there.
Yeah, well, the Manila Times is very happy to support such a worthy cause. Yes. But maybe we should circle back a bit, because you came from the World Bank. Actually, you spent your career there. When we met, you were with the IFC. And I suppose, as you were saying, that there is some overlap with what you did before in financial inclusion, now with water. Can you talk about that aspect of financial inclusion? What is the situation? What are the challenges that we still face? What is, I suppose, the assessment, right? And how does that fit in with your work now with Water.org?
So I retired from the World Bank, as you know, in 2019. So since then, I had several projects with USAID, and then I came across Water.org. I would regard myself as a financial inclusion advocate.
Okay. That's your.
That's
you
my
were professional work for many years.
Yes, my professional work for many years, and I'm grateful for the World Bank for that. The opportunity to work with water.org circled probably 3 times. First through a headhunter, second through a former colleague, and finally last year when they reached out directly to me. Of course, I have to go through the process. When I finally got it, because initially I don't see where does it intersect in my advocacies. Because like what I said, solving the water issue, I mean all the things I elaborated on regarding being given the opportunity to have an initial credit footprint, that is financial inclusion.
Okay.
So
what is that exactly? When we think about financial inclusion, are we just talking about the unbanked? Or are we also talking about financial literacy? Or
that's interesting.
Lack of financial literacy? And then maybe how, as you said, you don't have the credit scores, you don't have the credit history, now you can't take loans out for, I guess, an improvement on your household to get something so basic as water?
That's a very, very good question, Klink. Because I think there's a realization going through pandemic that financial inclusion has really evolved to a broader context. That being said, I mean, pre-pandemic, intuitively people will say financial inclusion is about the unbanked, reaching the bottom of the pyramid, and so on and so forth.
Right.
When actually financial inclusion is not just that.
Okay.
Financial inclusion is about even those who have deep pockets, maybe who are intimidated by technology, to be financially included. I mean, I remember my grandfather. I really witnessed my grandfather hiding money under the mattress.
Okay.
And yet, he was able to sustain the whole family throughout his life. So it's not a check in the box. It's a convergence of so many things to be able to lead someone to a sustainable life. It's not just about opening a bank account. It's about the whole 9 yards of opening the bank account, able to budget and allocate for all the needs of the family, able to save, able to purchase insurance and be resilient, and able to leverage on technology to be able to expand your economic opportunities. So financial inclusion is not, if you're gonna confine financial inclusion to just opening an account, then that's really not a sustainable way of looking at it.
It's also knowing how to spend the money.
And that's,
wisely,
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, I think it's so refreshing to see how Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, they recently updated their national strategy for financial inclusion. And you saw how it was broadened to really capture all this. There's already an angle on climate resilience. There's even an angle on agriculture. So that is what financial inclusion is. In the same manner, you look at the water.org business model. We solve for the water crisis through our business model. It intersects financial inclusion, gender inclusion, and poverty alleviation. So it's so difficult to see financial inclusion without touching so many areas of the sustainable development goals.
Right. Could you talk about some of the reception you've been receiving with this micro lending institutions? Because I would imagine, and correct me if I'm wrong, that when I imagine them, they look at helping the impoverished with livelihood, but here you are, you're building capacity to help them access water. How do you convince them that there will be a return somehow, that people will pay back? You know, when an institution gives money to, say, a group of women, I mean, they probably do some crafts or projects or do business that will, you know, hopefully will earn a return. But where's the return how do you convince the institution that there's a return coming when you give them to the households?
So like what I mentioned earlier, at the end of the day, they will have to do their own credit due diligence.
Right.
It's not for us to do that.
Right.
But then again, one thing that I think it's more of wanting to help the community.
Right.
Because I think that's one way you can really differentiate yourself as an entity. So for the microfinance institutions, the oldest institutions that we've been working with is ASA Philippines.
Okay.
I mentioned earlier we have mobilized $250 million.
But have they been receptive or?
Oh yeah, very
Okay.
receptive.
Okay.
We've been. That's one of our oldest partners in this.
Okay.
And I mean, looking at the pandemic, you'll be surprised. The NPLs were very low
Okay.
for this type of. Why? Because, for example, I'm gonna put an analogy. I live in a condominium here in
Okay.
Makati.
Okay.
If you don't pay your association dues,
They cut off your
Exactly,
utilities, yeah.
exactly. I think for this lowest income family, they know and they appreciate the value of water.
Right.
I mean, they come from a situation wherein they spend hours. I've quoted that 200 million hours each day around the world are spent just
That's
to
the
fetch water.
opportunity loss, right, for
yeah,
labor.
exactly. I mean, so they know what it meant not to have water. That's why they diligently pay their loans.
Do you recall what those NPL, there's non-performing loan ratios are for the Philippines? Do you have a ballpark figure? Is that
Probably
something?
around 2%.
And how does that compare to commercial?
I mean, before, that was pre-pandemic for commercial banks, right? 2%.
Okay.
But of course, we're probably 2 to 5% during the pandemic. That's not bad at all. I mean, now there are a lot of, the NPL levels are really high. I mean, I don't know exactly the figure, but with the pandemic over the past 2 years, and then you had the lockdowns and everything, right?
So maybe the banks or the executives from banks hearing this will be a little bit more encouraged.
I hope so. I hope so, because this is like, I mean, of course, we're not here to. At the end of the day, it's your due diligence.
Right.
But personally, not as water.org, I think this is a good way of diversifying your loan portfolio, and it's such a basic need that people will pay for it.